A quiet village, a wealthy man murdered in his own home, and a detective with the sharpest mind the world has ever known. But what if the killer is hiding in plain sight? What if everything you think you know is wrong? Today, we unravel Agatha Christie's greatest twist in the murder of Roger Ackroyd. Are you ready to solve the mystery before Hercule Poirot does? Let's begin. In the quiet village of King's Abbot, where life seemed as gentle as the morning breeze rustling through the hedgerows, an unsettling truth lingered just beneath the surface, a web of deceit, secrets, and murder waiting to be unraveled. The scene opens with a picturesque countryside, bathed in soft sunlight, where birds chirp and villagers stroll through cobblestone streets. The camera lingers on lush green fields and the grand manor of Fernley Park. But as the frame darkens, the tranquility begins to shift. The peaceful sky is replaced by a shadowy night. A faint light glimmers in a single window at the grand estate. Inside, we see the trembling hands of Mrs. Ferrars as she pours herself a drink. Her face is etched with guilt, her eyes hollow. She raises the glass to her lips as a single tear escapes. But before it falls, the scene cuts abruptly. We now glimpse Roger Ackroyd, a wealthy industrialist, seated in his grand study. His sharp features are highlighted by the flickering glow of a candle. He's reading a letter. Its contents are invisible to us, but his expression tightens as if every word is a dagger piercing through his composure. He slams the letter onto the desk and leans back in his chair, his jaw clenched in thought. The camera pans down, revealing the sender's name, blurred but teasing enough to spark intrigue. The frame shifts to Dr. Sheppard, seated at his desk. His pen glides smoothly across the paper, and his journal slowly fills with meticulous entries. A closer look at the ink reveals cryptic phrases, Ferrars' unspoken truths, Ackroyd secrets buried deep, and the ominous final line, "Something is coming." His expression is calm, yet his eyes flick nervously toward the window, where shadows dance under the moonlight. Just as the eerie silence of the night starts to settle, the camera cuts to a long, empty corridor in Fernley Park. The sound of a clock ticking grows louder and louder, creating a mounting sense of dread. Suddenly, a piercing scream shatters the stillness. The screen turns black. Cliffhanger ending. A whisper of chaos. And in that single moment, the carefully woven fabric of King's Abbot began to tear apart. Somewhere, someone knew the truth, but would they dare to speak it? Or would the village's secrets remain buried, just like the bodies destined to follow? Shadows in King's Abbot. The scene begins with a quiet morning in the village of King's Abbot. The streets are peaceful, lined with quaint cottages and bustling markets. But the serenity feels deceptive, like the calm before a storm. Dr. Sheppard, the watchful eye. The camera pans into the modest yet well-kept home of Dr. Sheppard, the village doctor. He sits at his desk, flipping through a medical ledger, his brow furrowed with focus. His voice narrates over the scene. In King's Abbot, life is simple on the surface, but if you look closely, you'll see cracks beneath the veneer of perfection. Everyone has a story to tell and secrets they'd rather keep. Dr. Sheppard's sharp eyes scan his notes, but as he closes the book, his gaze lingers on the window. He notices a shadow moving in the garden, just for a fleeting second, but long enough to stir unease. Caroline, the keeper of gossip and truth. The frame shifts to the kitchen, where Caroline, his sister, is brewing tea. With her sharp tongue and an even sharper intuition, she's the unofficial town oracle. Her voice is cheerful as she gossips with a neighbor at the door, but her eyes dart curiously toward Dr. Sheppard. "Caroline," he says with mild exasperation, "not everything in this village is a conspiracy." Her lips curl into a knowing smile. "Oh, but most things are, dear brother. You just haven't been paying attention." The tone is playful, but beneath it is a woman who notices every movement, hears every whisper, and never misses an opportunity to uncover the truth. Her casual remarks feel like breadcrumbs to something much larger. Roger Ackroyd, the haunted widower. The scene transitions to Fernley Park, a sprawling estate that towers over the village. Roger Ackroyd, a wealthy widower, paces his grand study. His hands tremble as he pours himself a drink. He pulls a drawer open and retrieves a photograph, its edges worn from being handled too often. The photo shows a woman smiling, but his face hardens as he stares at it. "You promised me," he whispers hoarsely, his voice breaking. The sound of footsteps in the hall startles him, and he quickly hides the photo. A knock follows, but he doesn't answer. Instead, he walks to the window, gazing out into the darkness, with an expression of fear and guilt. Flora and Ralph Peyton, lovers or liars? Outside, under the shadow of the estate's grand trees, Flora Ackroyd and Ralph Peyton meet in secret. Flora's elegant dress catches the moonlight, but her hands are clasped tightly as if hiding her nerves. Ralph looks restless, glancing over his shoulder repeatedly. "You are not listening to me, Ralph," Flora says, her voice trembling. "This can't go on. We have to tell him." Ralph grabs her arm, his tone urgent. "Do you have any idea what he'll do if he finds out? This isn't just about us, Flora. There's more at stake than you know." The tension between them is palpable, but they quickly separate when the faint sound of a door creaking comes from the house. Someone is watching, but who? Hercule Poirot, the unexpected player. In a quaint little cottage on the edge of the village, Hercule Poirot tends to his garden. His appearance is meticulous, even in retirement. The audience sees his methodical nature as he prunes a rosebush with precision. A knock at the door interrupts his peace, and his eyes flicker with mild annoyance. When he opens it, Dr. Sheppard stands on the doorstep, looking hesitant. Poirot greets him with a polite nod. "Monsieur Poirot," Dr. Sheppard begins, "I know you've retired, but we may need your expertise in the village." Poirot raises an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "Ah, mon ami, you are too modest. Tell me, what troubles you?" The camera lingers on Poirot's face, his expression thoughtful, as if sensing that his quiet retirement is about to take a dangerous turn. Cliffhanger ending. Secrets on the brink. The scene cuts to a dimly lit room in Fernley Park. A pair of gloved hands retrieves a letter from Roger Ackroyd's desk. The faint sound of breathing fills the room as the letter is unfolded. The camera doesn't reveal the face, only the trembling hands clutching the paper. Outside, the clock chimes midnight. In a village full of secrets, the narrator whispers ominously, "Someone was ready to kill to keep theirs hidden." The screen fades to black, leaving the audience suspended in the darkness of King's Abbot's growing mystery. The mystery unfolds, the deadly secret of Mrs. Ferrars. The scene opens in the dim light of the early morning. The village of King's Abbot is quiet, eerily still. The camera zooms in on Fernley Park's looming silhouette, shrouded in fog, as a single figure hurries through the gardenia shadow darting in the dark. The camera cuts quickly to the interior of the grand estate. We see the lifeless body of Mrs. Ferrars, sprawled on the floor, her hands still clutched around an empty glass. Mrs. Ferrars' suicide. The silence of the morning is shattered by the discovery. Dr. Sheppard, called to the scene, enters the study, his eyes narrowing as he surveys the body. Mrs. Ferrars, once elegant and composed, now lies crumpled and cold, her pallid face reflecting a lifetime of hidden sorrow. "She took it willingly, didn't she?" Dr. Sheppard murmurs under his breath. He kneels beside her, his gloved hands gently lifting the glass from her fingers. The faint scent of almonds lingers in the air, an unmistakable sign. Poison. As the scene unfolds, Dr. Sheppard's face betrays a mixture of shock and disbelief. This wasn't an accident. It was a calculated act. Mrs. Ferrars, the widow of a wealthy man, had poisoned herself. But why? What pushed her to take this dark step? The camera shifts to Mrs. Ferrars' letter, discarded on a nearby table. The crumpled paper seems to speak of a confession, of a burden too heavy to bear. But no one can read it yet except for one person, who may have already unlocked the mystery. Caroline's theory, a guilt-driven death. As Dr. Sheppard returns home, his sister Caroline is already waiting in the kitchen. She's pouring tea, but her eyes, sharp as ever, are focused on him. She doesn't need to ask, she already knows. Caroline has a knack for reading people, for seeing what others miss. "So, what happened?" she asks, not a hint of surprise in her voice. Dr. Sheppard leans against the doorframe, running a hand through his hair. His voice is grim as he recounts the details. She poisoned herself. The glass was in her hand, the poison unmistakable. It's hard to imagine. Caroline's lips curl into a knowing smile, one that makes Dr. Sheppard uneasy. She has a theory, a darker understanding of things that he's still piecing together. She sits up, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of unspoken knowledge. "You are not seeing the full picture, are you, Richard?" she says, her tone low and almost conspiratorial. She leans forward, the weight of her words hanging in the air like smoke. Mrs. Ferrars didn't just die from guilt. She couldn't live with what she did. She poisoned her husband, the man she'd once loved, the man she'd killed. Dr. Sheppard freezes. Her words cut through him like a blade, sharp and sudden. His mind races back to the rumors he'd overheard in the village, the hushed whispers about Mr. Ferrars' sudden, unexplained death. Could it be? "You don't mean," he begins, but Caroline cuts him off, her gaze intense. "I do. She killed him to inherit his wealth, but the guilt, it ate her from the inside out. She couldn't live with what she did, and now, here we are. She's gone." Dr. Sheppard is stunned, his face pale. Caroline's words seem to hang in the room, thick and heavy, like a storm waiting to break. What if she's right? What if Mrs. Ferrars didn't just die, but was driven to a violent end by the very thing that consumed her guilt? The hidden truth and unraveling lies. The camera cuts back to Fernley Park, where the servants gather, speaking in hushed tones. In the corner of the study, a shadowy figure lingers near Mrs. Ferrars' desk. It's a letter, one that she'd written just before her death, written in a trembling hand, confessing to something far darker than anyone could imagine. The letter is sealed, but it holds the key to understanding the complex web of deceit surrounding her life and death. As Dr. Sheppard and Caroline look out over the village from their window, the fog begins to roll in, thick and heavy. The village, once a place of peace, now feels like a stage for something far more sinister. There are whispers in the wind, whispers of people who know the truth, but are too afraid to speak it. Everyone has something to hide, and the walls are closing in. Cliffhanger ending. The guilt that haunts. In the stillness of the night, a sound breaks the quiet, soft footsteps echoing on the cobblestone streets. A figure cloaked in darkness moves toward Fernley Park. The camera zooms in on a gloved hand, gripping something tightly. It's a letter, the letter from Mrs. Ferrars' desk. "Someone knows, Richard," Caroline's voice whispers ominously. "Someone who's willing to kill to keep the truth buried." The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of a distant scream, a shrill cry that echoes across the village of King's Abbot. Roger Ackroyd's dinner conversation. The truth unveiled. The dinner table at Fernley Park was set with elegant precision, each silver fork gleaming under the flickering candlelight. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of conversation and the occasional clink of china. But beneath the surface of this evening's seemingly ordinary gathering, the air was thick with secrets, each one poised to tear through the delicate veneer of civility that held the guests in place. Roger Ackroyd, the master of this house, sat at the head of the table, his sharp gaze moving between his guests. His posture was rigid, as though he were bracing for a storm, and yet there was an unsettling calm in his demeanor. He had something to say, a truth he could no longer keep to himself. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. The conversation faltered as all eyes turned toward him. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, but its warmth felt far removed from the chill that now gripped the gathering. "I know the truth about Mrs. Ferrars," Roger began, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it, something taut, like a rope about to snap. His eyes scanned the faces of his guests, each one caught in the web of his words. Caroline, sitting just across from him, stiffened. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth as she regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Flora's smile faltered, her eyes darting nervously to her uncle. She clasped her hands together tightly, as if bracing for something she'd rather not hear. Dr. Sheppard, ever the observer, leaned back in his chair, his gaze narrowing ever so slightly as he studied Roger's every word, every movement. Was this the moment of reckoning? Or was it a calculated move in a dangerous game? Roger continued, each word carefully chosen, each one heavy with implications. "Mrs. Ferrars," he said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper, "was being blackmailed. And I know exactly who was behind it." The words hung in the air like smoke dense and suffocating. The shock that rippled through the room was palpable. No one spoke for a long, agonizing moment. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. Flora's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but quickly closed it, her mind racing for the right words or perhaps the right lie. Dr. Sheppard's lips pressed into a thin line, his thoughts running fast. Was this just an attempt to manipulate the room, to gain control over the conversation? Or was Roger Ackroyd finally revealing the key to everything? Caroline, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, placed her hands on the table. "What do you mean, Roger?" she asked, her voice a mix of genuine curiosity and something darker in instinct that told her this wasn't just idle chatter. There was something deeper at play. Roger leaned forward, his gaze never leaving his sister-in-law. "I've known for some time now, Caroline," he said, his tone hardening. "It wasn't just an affair. Mrs. Ferrars had a secret, a dangerous one. A secret someone would kill to keep hidden." The room seemed to freeze. The words "someone would kill" hung in the air like a warning, a death sentence for anyone who dared to uncover the truth. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. "Who?" she asked, barely above a whisper, her voice strained with the weight of unspoken fear. Roger glanced at his guest's niece, his doctor, his closest allies, and with a pause that stretched to an unbearable silence, he spoke the name that no one expected. It was Ralph Peyton. The words landed like a bombshell, shattering the fragile calm of the evening. Flora gasped, her face contorting with shock and disbelief. She reached out to steady herself, her hand gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only thing keeping her from falling. Ralph Peyton, the man she loved, the man whose future she had envisioned so clearly. Dr. Sheppard's heart skipped a beat, his mind racing to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. Ralph, the charming yet troubled man, had a darker side. Had he been involved in something far more sinister than anyone had imagined? Caroline leaned forward, her curiosity piqued, but a tinge of fear laced her voice. "What are you saying, Roger? That Ralph was blackmailing Mrs. Ferrars?" Roger's eyes flickered with a secret understanding, one that he had not yet shared. "Not just blackmail," he murmured, almost as if to himself. "He was involved in something far worse. And now, with Mrs. Ferrars dead, the truth is slipping through our fingers. But it won't be long before it all comes crashing down." The tension in the room was unbearable. The faint sound of thunder rumbled in the distance, mirroring the storm of emotions raging in their hearts. Who was lying? Who was telling the truth? And more importantly, who was willing to kill to keep their secrets hidden? Cliffhanger ending. A dangerous game. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive. Just as someone was about to speak, the door to the dining room creaked open slowly, deliberately. All eyes turned, and in that moment, everyone knew. Something, or someone, was about to change the course of their lives forever. Roger Ackroyd's eyes widened, and his voice faltered. "Who's there?" he demanded, his hands gripping the edge of the table. But before anyone could answer, a figure stepped into the doorway, a shadow, barely visible in the dim light. And in the stillness, the most chilling sound of all echoed through the room. A faint, distant scream. A dark revelation. The scene begins in Roger Ackroyd's study, bathed in the dim, flickering light of a solitary desk lamp. The room is meticulously arranged, each object in its Placian air of quiet, controlled order that belies the growing tension within. The walls are lined with shelves of books, their titles familiar yet distant, as if the knowledge within them could never unravel the secret looming in the room. But tonight the study feels different. The heavy curtains are drawn, the air is thick with an unsettling silence, and in the center of the room rests the object that will change everything. a gleaming dagger. It is old, ornate, with a hilt wrapped in dark leather, and a blade that catches the dim light in a way that seems almost unnatural. Its presence is menacing, as though it has a story to tell of blood and betrayal, of death that is already a whisper on the wind. On the desk beside it lies an ominous letter, its edges curling as if it has been handled countless times. The ink is smudged in places, and the handwriting is sharp and precise, each word filled with a threat. It rests there, waiting silent, but insistent. Dr. Sheppard, the ever-watchful observer, steps into the study. He is calm, but his pulse quickens. There's something in the air tonight, a weight that he can't shake off. The letter, he knows, holds the key to something dark, a secret that Roger Ackroyd has refused to face. But now, the time has come. Roger Ackroyd stands by the desk, his hand hovering over the letter. He is no longer the confident, controlled man he once was. His face is pale, his expression strained with fear, and his fingers tremble as they reach for the sealed envelope. As he breaks the wax seal, Dr. Sheppard watches, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of dread and curiosity. What does it say? What truth is hidden behind those cryptic words? As Roger begins to read the letter, his eyes widen. The color drains from his face, and for a moment, he seems to be frozen in place, his body rigid, his breath shallow. The tension in the room is palpable, as though the very air around them is holding its breath, waiting for the truth to come out. Dr. Sheppard's departure, the calm before the storm. Dr. Sheppard turns to leave, his footsteps echoing softly in the hall. He knows something is about to happen, something that will change everything, but he cannot stay. There is a pull, a sense of impending doom that he cannot ignore, and as he exits the study, he casts one final glance over his shoulder. Roger Ackroyd remains in the same position, his gaze locked on the letter, unable to tear his eyes away. Dr. Sheppard's thoughts race as he steps into the hallway. The letter, the dagger. What are they hiding? But no answers, commonly a growing sense of urgency. It's too late now. The storm is coming, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. The phone call. Roger Ackroyd is dead. The camera shifts, and the next moment, we hear the shrill ring of the telephone echoing in the hallway. Dr. Sheppard, already several steps away from the study, pauses for a fraction of a second, his heart skipping a beat. The call is for him. With a sudden sense of foreboding, Dr. Sheppard picks up the receiver. His voice is steady, but inside the panic is rising. Dr. Sheppard, the voice on the other end says, a voice he doesn't recognize. It is calm, unnervingly so, but there's something in the tone that sends a shiver down his spine. Roger Ackroyd is dead. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His stomach lurches, and for a moment the room spins around him. What do you mean? He demands, his voice thick with disbelief. There's no mistake, doctor, the voice continues. He's dead. You need to come back to the study. Now. The line goes dead. Dr. Sheppard stands frozen, the receiver still pressed to his ear. His mind races, his thoughts colliding in a whirlwind of confusion and dread. How? What happened in there? Cliffhanger. The real horror unfolds. Without a moment's hesitation, Dr. Sheppard races back to the study, his heart pounding in his chest. Each step feels like a lifetime, the sense of dread growing with every passing second. The door to the study is now slightly ajar, and as he approaches, he feels a chill sweep through him, cold, unnatural, as though death itself lingers in the room. He pushes open the door with a creak, his eyes scanning the room in disbelief. Roger Ackroyd is gone. The dagger lies on the floor, its blade stained red. The letter is crumpled in the corner, abandoned, its contents unreadable now, lost in the horror of what has just occurred. But as Dr. Sheppard steps further into the room, his eyes catch something more, a shadow moving in the corner, a faint whisper of movement in the dim light. The door behind him slams shut with a force that echoes through the empty house. A figure steps out from the shadows, and the air in the room thickens with the weight of what's to come. But this time, it isn't Roger Ackroyd who stands before him, it's someone else, someone whose identity is as dangerous as the very truth they've been hiding. The real horror has only just begun. The investigation begins. Hercule Poirot's arrival. The scene shifts to a quiet but intense moment as Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, steps into the grand yet eerily silent home of Roger Ackroyd. His small, sharp eyes flicker with curiosity and focus as he takes in the scene. The walls of the study, lined with books that seem to whisper their secrets, hold a tension that even Poirot cannot ignore. With deliberate calm, Poirot steps into the room. He adjusts his gloves and surveys the space, his gaze flicking over every detail with surgical precision. The dagger, the crumpled letter, the chair, moved from its usual place. Everything from the slightest shift in the air to the smallest object is of importance. He doesn't speak immediately. His methodical silence forces the room to wait, hanging on the cusp of revelation. His mind races, working as fast as the thoughts that flicker behind his eyes. The scene is intricately a puzzle whose pieces are scattered, but each one has its place. Poirot steps forward, his polished shoes making soft taps on the wooden floor. He crouches down to examine the footprints, bare and faint, leading from the window to the center of the room. His fingers hover over the ground, as if the floor itself could speak, highlighting the clues, a web of secrets. Poirot straightens and turns his attention to the first clue, the missing letter. He picks it up carefully, as though the paper might unravel the mystery within. The letter is the crux of everything, the thing that could have held the truth and yet now is lost, its contents never fully revealed. Poirot stares at the empty space where the letter once was, trying to discern its message, its significance. Then there are the footprints. They are not random. They are deliberate, barefoot and faint, as if someone tried to move quietly but failed. The footprints trail from the window, and the angle from which they approach the study tells Poirot one crucial thing. The murderer must have entered through the window. But why? Why not through the door? The window, small, secluded, was an odd choice. Yet the footprints, though fragile, tell him the intruder did not enter by accident. Next, Poirot's eyes narrow at the moved chair in the study. It's subtle, a detail most would overlook, but not Poirot. The chair has been dragged several feet from its usual position, almost as though it had been disturbed mid-conversation. But by whom, and why? What does the movement of a chair signify? Why, after everything that happened, was it necessary to move the chair at all? The chair, to Poirot, is both a clue and a question, a key to unlocking the true nature of what occurred in this room. Questioning the suspects, unraveling their lies. Poirot turns to the suspects, each one of them standing nearby, their faces strained, their eyes filled with suspicion and guilt. Flora Ackroyd, the daughter of the deceased, stands with her hands clenched tightly in front of her. Her eyes dart nervously from Poirot to the scene in the room. She is the grieving daughter, yes, but there is something about her composure that feels too controlled, too rehearsed. Could she have known more than she's letting on? Could her role in the household have been more than just that of a grieving daughter? Ralph Peyton, the young man whose history with the deceased is murky, stands by the doorway. He is shaking, his face pale, his fists clenched in defiance. He claims innocence, yet his behavior betrays him. His nervous energy is evident, as if every word he speaks is a calculated lie. Could he have killed Ackroyd in a fit of rage? Or is there something deeper at play, a dark secret he is hiding? Ursula Bourne, the quiet and reserved woman, stands in the corner, her eyes avoiding everyone's gaze. Her trembling hands suggest an inner conflict, a tension that she is trying desperately to hide. She might seem the least likely to be involved, but Poirot knows better than to dismiss anyone based on their outward demeanor. What connection does she have to the events that unfolded? Could she have known more than she admitted? Parker, the housekeeper, stands near the door, his eyes fixed firmly on Poirot. He is an enigma, man of few words, but many secrets. His presence in the house at all times gives him a vantage point few others had. But what does he know? Is he an innocent observer, or is his aloofness hiding something darker? Cliffhanger, the moved chair and the growing suspicion. Poirot stands in the center of the room, his mind racing, his thoughts weaving together a complex tapestry of truths, half-truths, and lies. He steps toward the moved chair once more, running his fingers over its back, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. His voice, sharp and deliberate, cuts through the tension. "Why was the chair moved?" he asks, his tone steady, yet filled with an underlying curiosity. The room falls into silence. His words hang in the air like a lingering threat. No one answers, but each suspect knows what he's really asking. Who moved the chair, and why? Poirot's gaze sweeps over the room one last time before he turns. Slowly, his footsteps echoing in the otherwise silent space. He stops at the window, his eyes narrowing as he examines the faint remnants of the footprints that lead away from it. There is no obvious conclusion, just a web of questions, each one leading to another. And each answer seems to be just out of reach. As Poirot steps away, his mind is already at work, piecing together the puzzle, each piece adding to the weight of the mystery. The room is still, save for the soft rustling of Poirot's coat as he moves towards the door. The cliffhanger leaves the audience gasping for more. The simple question, why was the chair moved, holds a universe of possibilities, each one more sinister than the last. Who moved it? And why was it so important to the mystery at hand? The tension builds, the stakes rise, and the investigation takes another turn, leaving the audience desperate to know what happens next. Twists and revelations. The lies unravel. The investigation has reached a boiling point. Hercule Poirot stands in the dimly lit study, his sharp eyes watching each suspect with unblinking intensity. The clues have been carefully examined, but the truth has remained elusive, buried beneath layers of deceit. Now, the pieces of the puzzle begin to shift, each revelation revealing a deeper and darker truth, one that will change everything. Flora's shocking confession. Flora Ackroyd, the grieving niece, sits rigid in her chair, her eyes darting nervously from Poirot to the others. The tension in the room is thick, palpable. She has been silent, her every movement a mask of controlled grief, but now her voice breaks through the stillness. "I never saw my uncle after dinner," she says, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and something darker guilt. The room falls into a stunned silence. The words hang in the air, heavy with implication. Flora's statement is a jarring contradiction. She was the last person to see Roger Ackroyd alive, yet now she claims she never laid eyes on him again after dinner. Why? Was this a moment of honest confusion, or is she hiding something more sinister? The truth is slipping through their fingers, and for a moment, it seems as if the entire investigation might crumble under the weight of her words. Poirot's eyes narrow as he processes the confession, his mind racing to connect the dots. What is she hiding? Ralph Peyton's secret marriage to Ursula. The room remains tense, each suspect on edge. But then Ralph Peyton, his face pale and drawn, breaks the silence. His voice is low, almost shameful, as if he has been carrying this secret for far too long. "We wanted to tell him, but he wouldn't understand," he admits, his eyes locking with Poirot's. The words hit the room like a thunderclap, and the air seems to thicken with unspoken emotions. The secret Ralph reveals is shocking. He and Ursula, the quiet woman who has barely spoken a word throughout the investigation, have been married in secret. The implications of this revelation are staggering. Roger Ackroyd, the wealthy widower, had no idea his niece's lover was already bound by marriage to another. The layers of deception seem endless, and the truth is slipping through the cracks of every statement made. Could Ralph's desperate need to keep this secret have driven him to violence? Did he kill to preserve his hidden life? Ursula, her face pale with horror, looks away, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The truth is out, but it raises even more questions. What else are they hiding? And why did they keep such an important truth from everyone, including Roger? Poirot's deductions, the dictaphone and the missing letter. Poirot's eyes flicker with understanding as he listens to the confessions. He has been piecing together the facts, quietly observing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He steps forward, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his chin, deep in thought. "There is something you've all overlooked," Poirot says, his voice cutting through the rising tension. The dictaphone, Roger. Ackroyd's dictaphone. It was the key to his last moments, the moment when he was going to reveal everything. But someone tampered with it. And then there is the missing letter. Poirot's eyes sweep over the room, his gaze lingering on each of the suspects, one by one. His mind races, piecing the fragments of the puzzle together. The dictaphone had been used by Ackroyd to record his thoughts, his final confession, before the murder. Yet it had been tampered with. The sound was distorted, the message obscured. Someone had erased the truth. The missing letter is another enigma, a piece of the puzzle that has been buried, hidden away. Was it destroyed, or is it still out there, waiting to be discovered? What did the letter contain? Who had the opportunity to take it? As Poirot speaks, a sense of inevitability hangs in the air. The truth is on the verge of being exposed. The confessions, the clues, the lies, they are all leading to one place. But one question remains. Who is hiding the most important truth of all? Cliffhanger, the unresolved mystery. Poirot pauses, his eyes scanning the room. His face inscrutable. The pieces are almost in place. He can feel it in his bones. The final piece is within reach, just out of sight. But as the truth inches closer, a disturbing thought nags at him. But there is one thing, Poirot says, his voice low and deliberate. One piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit. The room goes deathly silent. All eyes are on him as the words hang in the air, heavy with significance. Poirot's gaze locks onto each suspect in turn, his eyes piercing through their facades. His expression remains calm, but inside, he feels the weight of the truth pressing down on him. Someone is lying, Poirot declares, his voice sharp, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. And until we uncover that lie, we will never know the full truth of what happened to Roger Ackroyd. The room trembles with uncertainty. A lie, buried somewhere in the web of confessions, is holding back the final revelation. Who is hiding the truth? Who has been playing everyone, manipulating the investigation to cover their own tracks? The cliffhanger is a potent one. Someone is lying, and Poirot knows it. But who? The mystery is not solved yet. The web of lies is thick, and the truth remains just out of reach. The question lingers, unanswered, and the audience is left on the edge of their seats, eager for the next piece of the puzzle. What happens next? Who is hiding the final truth? The hunt for the murderer isn't over, and the biggest revelation is yet to come. The big twist. The final revelation. The tension in the room is unbearable. Poirot, standing at the center of the study, surveys the group of suspects, each one nervously shifting their weight, avoiding eye contact. The truth has been creeping closer with each passing moment, but now Poirot is ready to unveil the most startling twist of all. He steps forward, his voice steady and resolute. The killer, Poirot begins, his eyes narrowing, is someone who is hidden in plain sight. The words hang in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating the room. Every suspect freezes, their faces contorting in confusion, disbelief and fear. The answer is right there, but no one can see it. The mind reels as Poirot's words reverberate, unraveling the last threads of the mystery. Flashback. The crime unfolds. As Poirot's words settle, the scene shifts. The camera zooms into the past, revealing a chilling series of events. It's a quiet evening in the study. Roger Ackroyd is at his desk, deep in thought, unaware of the imminent danger. The camera pans to Dr. Sheppard, a figure cloaked in darkness, moving stealthily through the room. His face is tense, his every movement calculated and precise. Dr. Sheppard, the trusted village doctor and the narrator of this story, is the one who has orchestrated the murder. The weight of his guilt is visible in his eyes, but it is masked behind a facade of calm professionalism. He places the dictaphone on Ackroyd's desk, carefully setting the recorder to capture his victim's last words. The scene is intimate, deliberate. Dr. Sheppard knows what he's doing. He is crafting a story that will hide his guilt behind layers of deception. But that is not all. The twisted mind of the murderer goes further. Dr. Sheppard retrieves Ralph's shoes, a pair of worn, distinctive boots, and places them near the study window, creating a trail of footprints leading to the scene. He knows the importance of these details. They will shift suspicion, mislead the investigation, and cover his tracks. The plan is meticulous, flawless. Dr. Sheppard carefully wipes away all evidence of his own presence, leaving behind nothing but the carefully crafted clues, and then he retreats into the shadows, the darkness of the study swallowing him whole. Poirot's final confrontation with Dr. Sheppard. The flashback ends, and the camera returns to the present, where Poirot stands before Dr. Sheppard, the last piece of the puzzle finally falling into place. Poirot's voice cuts through the tension like a knife. "You wrote this story to hide your guilt, didn't you?" he asks, his gaze unwavering, locking onto Dr. Sheppard's eyes. The words land like a hammer, shattering the calm that the doctor has so carefully maintained. Dr. Sheppard's face twists, his composure cracking. His eyes dart nervously, his hand trembling ever so slightly. For the first time, the veneer of control slips, revealing the monster lurking beneath the surface. The facade of the trustworthy village doctor is gone, replaced by the cold, calculating murderer. "Yes," Dr. Sheppard finally admits, his voice barely above a whisper. His guilt is tangible, dripping from every word. "I did it. I killed him. But you'll never prove it. You'll never get me." His defiance only fuels Poirot's resolve. The detective stands firm, his eyes piercing through the doctor's facade. Poirot's presence is calm, almost serene, but his words carry the weight of inevitability. Cliffhanger. The end of the story. Poirot's final words echo in the room, final and damning. "But now, Dr. Sheppard, the story ends with you." The revelation is complete. Dr. Sheppard's entire plan is manipulation. His lies, his murder is laid bare. But there is still a final moment, a lingering question. The air is thick with the weight of Poirot's words. The entire room holds its breath, knowing that this moment will change everything. Will Dr. Sheppard try to escape? Will he fight for his freedom, or will he accept the weight of his guilt? The tension is unbearable, and the question looms large: how far will a man go to preserve his secrets? Will he be brought to justice, or will the truth be buried under the weight of his deception? The final showdown is imminent. The story that Poirot has so carefully pieced together is now at its end, but Dr. Sheppard's fate is still to be decided. What will he do next? Will he confess fully, or will he try to twist the truth once more? And, more importantly, who else might be involved in this tangled web of lies? The cliffhanger leaves the audience on the edge of their seats, desperate for the final resolution, as Poirot's words echo in their minds. The story ends with you. The question remains, what happens when the killer is finally cornered? The mystery may be solved, but the consequences have only just begun. Powerful conclusion. Dr. Sheppard's Apologia. The room is silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The tension is palpable, as the last threads of the mystery are drawn tight. Dr. Sheppard, his face a mixture of defiance and resignation, stands before Poirot. The weight of his guilt hangs heavily in the air, but he refuses to break. The truth has been exposed, every calculated move, every lie, and every murder, but it hasn't brought peace. "I have played my part," Dr. Sheppard says, his voice low but steady. "I have done what I had to do. No one could understand. No one could see it the way I did. But now, justice will prevail." His words seem almost detached from the gravity of the situation, as if he's convinced that his actions, no matter how dark, were justified in his mind. He has woven his own narrative, and in that narrative, he is not the villain but the man who did what needed to be done. A sense of finality hangs in the air as he steps back, his eyes meeting Poirot's for one last time, as if daring the detective to challenge him. The room holds its breath. Dr. Sheppard's confession is cold, calculated, but still tinged with the faintest hint of self-righteousness. He doesn't seem remorseful. Instead, he seems like a man who believes he is the hero of his own twisted tale. Hercule Poirot's closing line. Poirot, ever the calm and composed detective, steps forward, his eyes sharp and unwavering. His gaze meets Dr. Sheppard's, and for a brief moment the room seems to shrink around them. Poirot's voice, measured and certain, carries the weight of truth and finality. "The truth," he says softly, yet with undeniable force, "will always find a way." His words settle over the room like a slow, deliberate storm. There is no escape from the truth. No matter how carefully one hides it, it will always emerge, shining in the light of justice. Poirot, with his unparalleled insight, has once again proven that no lie, no matter how carefully crafted, can withstand the unyielding pursuit of the truth. For a moment, there is complete stillness. The room is suffused with the unspoken understanding that Poirot has done his job not just as a detective, but as the arbiter of truth. Justice, however it may unfold, will always have its day. Cliffhanger: what happened to Dr. Sheppard next? As the finality of Poirot's words hangs in the air, the camera shifts to Dr. Sheppard, the man who once wove a web of lies so intricate, so convincing, now stands as a broken figure. His fate is sealed, but his story is far from over. The tension builds, and Poirot's eyes narrow, almost as if contemplating something beyond the confession. He pauses, his gaze lingering on Dr. Sheppard before turning to address the others in the room. His voice is quiet, but there is a subtle sense of foreboding. "But what happened to Dr. Sheppard next?" Poirot asks, his words heavy with intrigue. "That is another story." The words land like a bombshell, hanging in the air with a sharpness that leaves everyone in stunned silence. The conclusion is not as simple as the confession. There is still something about Dr. Sheppard's fate that remains unresolved. What does Poirot know that the others don't? How far will the consequences of Dr. Sheppard's actions reach? The cliffhanger is undeniable. The audience is left with 1,000 questions, each one gnawing at them with a burning curiosity. Dr. Sheppard's fate is sealed, but what happens next? Will he face the full force of justice, or is there something more to his end? What truly awaits a man who has crossed the line, and is there redemption to be found? The mystery is solved, but the lingering uncertainty about Dr. Sheppard's ultimate fate leaves the door wide open. Will Poirot's final words lead to more revelations? Will the twisted mind of Dr. Sheppard escape his fate, or will justice have the last word? What happens to Dr. Sheppard next? That is the question that will echo in the minds of everyone who hears it, leaving them haunted by the uncertainty, desperate to know the conclusion that has yet to unfold. Can you guess who the blackmailer is before the reveal? Who was your top suspect? Let us know and stay tuned for more mysteries.